Our Old Testament reading for this third Sunday of Advent comes to us from the prophet Isaiah, the 11th chapter, verses 1 through 9. If you'd like to follow along in your pew Bibles, I'd invite you to do so at this time. It's on page 558 in the Old Testament. Let's all listen for God's word to us today. A shoot shall come out from the stump of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. The Spirit of the Lord shall rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. His delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. He shall not judge by what his eyes see, or decide by what his ears hear. But with righteousness he shall judge the poor, and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. He shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked. Righteousness shall be the belt around his waist, and faithfulness the belt around his loins. The wolf shall live with the lamb. The leopard shall lie down with the kid. The calf and the lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze, their young shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play over the hole of the asp, and the weaned child shall put its hand on the adder's den. They will not hurt or destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. The word of the Lord. Mark Kemp and I were talking this past week about how a year or so ago at this time, I think it was, that we had that snow and ice storm. Do you remember that? Came at right about 7 a.m. on, I think it was the second Sunday of Advent last year. I didn't want to cancel worship, but, we ended up having to cancel worship. And I remember being at the church, deciding to go home, and the car was slipping on the ice on my drive home. That was exciting. Then I arrived back home, and I was hoping that the excitement for that day was done. Apparently, it was not done. A neighbor called us about 9:30 that morning. Hey, do y'all know that one of your trees is tipped over and on your house? No, we did not know that. Turns out the snow and ice had weighed too much for one of our evergreens, and it just collapsed onto our house. Now, no one was hurt. There wasn't even any damage to the house. Well, we had it removed, and after they removed the tree, what was left? Well, a stump, right? And that stump sat there for quite a while. At the time, we obviously needed the tree removed quickly, so we asked the tree company to come out and remove it as fast as they could. No need to grind up the stump at that moment. But then we kept forgetting to call the company back, and that stump, it just sat there next to our driveway for months. So unsightly. I mean, what good is a stump? The only good thing I can say in favor of a stump comes from Shel Silverstein. Do you remember his book, The Giving Tree? It's about a little boy who plays in his favorite tree every day, swinging from her limbs, eating her apples. And as a young man, he takes all the apples and he sells them. And as a middle-aged man, he takes all her limbs and builds a house. And as a retired man, he cuts down the trunk to build a boat. And as an old man, he returns to the tree. I wish that I could give you something, said the tree, but I have nothing left. I am just an old stump. I don't need very much now, said the boy turned old man, just a quiet place to sit and rest. Well, said the tree, straightening herself up as much as she could, an old stump is good for sitting and resting. Come, boy, sit down and rest. And the old man did, and the tree was happy. It's a wonderful story. But it's also a sad story. In just a few short pages, Shel Silverstein makes the reader wish for an earlier time in the story. You see the old man, you see the stump, and you don't want the stump. You remember just a few pages earlier when the tree was healthy and strong and the old man was a young boy full of vim and vigor, and there is this tremendous feeling of loss. You may think I'm reading too much into this children's story, but I tell you, it's not just a children's story. It is also for adults. You see, a stump stands for what used to be. A stump is a reminder of what used to be. Look at our text from Isaiah again. The prophet says, "A shoot shall come out from the stump of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots." Notice what the prophet does not say. The prophet does not say, "A shoot shall come out of one of the many branches on the glorious tree of Jesse's lineage. This full and beautiful tree that has such gorgeous shade, such wonderful strength, shall produce a branch more glorious than all." No. Isaiah says, "A shoot shall come out of the stump." From a stump, how many times does a stump grow into a tree again after it's become a stump? I've never seen it. Now, there's good reason for the prophet to write it this way. The phrase, "the stump of Jesse," who is Jesse? The father of David, right? The father of King David, the greatest king Israel ever had. But by the time the prophet Isaiah is writing, the Davidic kingdom that was once so glorious and powerful and strong, it was about to become a stump. The Assyrians will overrun it, then the Babylonians will conquer it. There are multiple deportations into exile for Israel and for Judah, loss of land, loss of home, loss of identity, and into this time of loss, Isaiah says, "A shoot shall come out of the stump of Jesse." Think about Isaiah's decision to use the image of a stump. Remember, a stump stands for what used to be. Have you spent any time during Advent thinking about what used to be? It snuck up on me the other day, and I remembered a time when I was maybe 11 or 12 years old. I had just run and walked 10 miles with my father in the Crop Walk for Hunger. This was an annual event at the church that I was growing up in. 10 miles with my dad. Got back, and a group of boys at the church were playing touch football in the yard. So I went out and played touch football with all of them after doing 10 miles. I got in the car to go home, and my dad said, "Aren't you tired?" I said, "No, I'm not tired." And I was fine. I woke up the next day, went to school, I was fine. Why did this memory sneak up on me? Well, a couple weeks ago, we had friends in town for Thanksgiving. These friends have children our boys' age, and we all played kickball together in the backyard on Thanksgiving Day. And about halfway through the game, I tried to catch the ball. And instead of catching the ball, I started to do the splits. And the next morning, my legs were sore and my back wasn't right, and I'm hobbling around, all from a kickball game. And I thought, whatever happened to the good old days? You know what I was doing, right? I was thinking about what used to be. Have you ever thought about what used to be, particularly at this time of year? Your 2 children who are now out of college are coming home for Christmas soon, and it will be good to have them home, really good. But a small part of you longs for the day when they were 7 and 5 instead of 27 and 25, back when they would be getting you up on Christmas morning. And you would complain at the time, but you secretly kind of treasured it. And back then, Christmas was always celebrated at your parents' house. But now, 20 years later, your parents are gone, and your children are grown. And you still like Christmas, but there's a longing to it, and you sometimes think about what used to be. You know what the word for this is, right? It's nostalgia. Nostalgia can creep up on us during this season. In fact, it can become one of our greatest temptations during this season. Perhaps the best explanation for nostalgia that I've heard comes from that former TV show Mad Men. In its first season, the show begins in the late 1950s. The central character is Don Draper, an advertising executive, a brilliant but troubled man. The first season makes it clear that Don's family life is a mess. After repeated infidelities, his marriage is on the verge of collapsing, so Don tries to focus on his work. One of Don's clients is the Kodak Company. They've come up with a new slide projector where the slides are not in a straight tray, but in a wheel. It's not a huge innovation. It's a very small innovation. So they look to Don to create an advertising campaign that will make people want a new slide projector with a wheel. The clients enter the conference room. Have you figured out how to work the wheel into it? And Don starts his presentation. My first job, he says, I was at a fur company with this old Greek guy named Teddy. Teddy told me that the most important idea in advertising is new. New. It creates an itch. But he also talked about a deeper bond with the product, nostalgia. It's delicate, but potent. Then Don turns on the slide projector and he continues his presentation. He clicks through slides of his own family in happier times. In one slide, his two children are playing in the backyard. In another, his son has fallen asleep on his chest. In another, Don is putting his ear up to his pregnant wife's belly. All the while, he continues with his presentation. Teddy told me that in Greek, nostalgia literally means the pain from an old wound. It's a twinge in your heart, far more powerful than memory alone. Then Don moves to the product. It's not called the wheel, it's called the carousel. It goes backwards and forwards. It lets us travel the way a child travels, around and back home again. It takes us to a place where we ache to go again. It's nostalgia, and nostalgia sells. We hear it in the music that gets played at this time of year, right? I'm dreaming of a white Christmas just like the ones I used to know. Nostalgia. Maybe it's the message of our culture and our commercials, but it is not the message of this text. This marvelous, beautiful text from Isaiah leads us to believe that we're being taken to a place called nostalgia with the stump of Jesse, but then, pow. Starting in verse 6, the wolf shall live with the lamb, the leopard shall lie down with the kid. The calf and the lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. Folks, there is nothing nostalgic about that. Do any of you have a memory of a time when lions were vegans and children led leopards by the tail? Isaiah's not preaching nostalgia. Isaiah says, see this stump? This stump does not stand for what used to be. God is going to do something new. Isaiah's not preaching a world we have already known. Isaiah is preaching a world turned upside down, one that we have never seen before. In contrast to the songs and the stories that invite us to yearn for a past that we can never recover, this text from Isaiah invites us into a future that is new and different and belongs entirely to the imagination of God. And we struggle with that, don't we? With the imagination of God, we all struggle with newness and change and what's different. Look, the proof is in the pudding. When you go to Christmas Eve 9 days from now, when you go to worship on Christmas Eve, how many of you would like to sing 4 new songs on Christmas Eve? Right, exactly. We do not. We want Silent Night. We want joy to the world. We want what we know, what's traditional. We want God to speak like God has always spoken to us before. And yet Isaiah reminds us that there is another side to our faith. When life gives us a stump, God is not finished. Let me say that again, because some of you may have a stump in your life right now. When God gives us a stump, when life gives us a stump, God is not finished. When what used to be can never be again, and there is a twinge in your heart, because it can never be that way again, that does not mean the end of the road for God. God is also committed to what is new, what is unknown, what we've never seen before. The wolf will lie with the lamb. A shoot will grow out of the stump. The promise of the gospel is that God can and will do things, transforming our lives in ways we have never experienced before. The French writer Antoine de Saint-Exupéry is probably best known as the author of that wonderful book, The Little Prince. What's not as well known is that Saint-Exupéry was also a pilot in the French Air Force during World War II. He was stationed in North Africa and became friendly with some of the local Bedouin, tough people, resourceful people, living their days in the desert. On one occasion, he managed to fly a few of these Bedouin home with him on a visit to France. He expected these desert nomads to be wowed by Western technology, the Eiffel Tower, the railroad locomotive, the automobile. But those wonders of the modern age were met with indifference by the Bedouin. There was, however, one sight that filled them with awe. It was in the French Alps. It was a waterfall. Remember, these were people who measured their lives by water. How much water their canteens could hold, how many hours' ride it was to the next oasis, how long their camels could go without taking a drink. Yet here, gushing from the side of the mountain, was something they had truly never seen before. In the words of Saint-Exupéry, they stood in silence. The flow of a single second would have resuscitated whole caravans. That, mad with thirst, had pressed on into the eternity of mirages. They stood there, gazing at the unfolding of a mystery. That which came roaring out of the belly of the mountain was life itself. It was God manifesting himself. What was so remarkable, so heart-stopping for those Bedouin, was the fact that the flow of water never stopped. May I suggest that Isaiah has told us the same thing today. I don't know what stumps you have in your life right now, what part of your life feels just like a remnant of what you had. I do know that God's love and grace will never stop. It will never stop pouring down on you and pouring down on the person you're worried about right now. And one day it will overflow in each of our lives in a way that will leave us speechless and filled with wonder. Amen.